Os, I'm Watanabe Shinji, Kudo Daido Juku Shihan, and also Yigaryu Karate Renshi. Today is the 7th installment of the Naihanchi Analysis series and is a consideration of Nami-gaeshi. Nami-gaeshi is one of the most typical movements of Naihanchi, and at the same time, it is the most difficult part. First, check the correct way to do Nami-gaeshi. First, check the correct way to do Nami-gaeshi of classic Naihanchi. Then, the purpose of that movement. And finally, compare it with other styles. Then, let's get going. Os. There are many different ways to do Nami-gaeshi, depending on the style. But here is how I do it in my Yigaryu Karate, which is in the classic Naihanchi lineage. While keeping your posture unchanged as possible, pull your knee up. At this time, the seam of the raised leg will be at an angle, but this is only natural, and it's not necessary to consciously raise the seam at an angle like brushing something off. Return the raised leg as gently as possible. Do not fall with a thud. Some schools raise the leg as if to brush something off, or step down forcefully on the raised leg. But I do not use that method. I'll explain why later. Lift the knee up while keeping the posture unchanged as possible, and return as gently as possible. To use an analogy, remove the legs on the one side of the chair and still stand. And that is the kind of posture control that is required in this Nami-gaeshi. So, what are we learning from this movement? The first is controlling the posture I just mentioned, or the COG, center of gravity. Now, it looks like I'm holding on both legs. But I should not be in a state of immobility. If you are immobile, you will be beaten at will by your opponent. So, for example, when a foot sweep or a low kick comes, you must be able to quickly move. At the same time, when you bring down your raised leg, you must be not fall with a thud like this. Then, the moment you fall, you are immobile again. It's necessary to control the posture and COG to maintain a stable but freedom of movement. And at that time, it's not good if you move this way and lift your leg. That's too late. Also, it's very bad in a fight situation to let the opponent know where your COG is or which way you have moved. For example, suppose I move my COG from here to the left in the middle of a fight. What would you think? You would think, oh, there is a right kick coming, and prepare for it. Or, if you were to kick first, you would think the left kick is going to be blocked, but the low kick on the right will hit. So, you have to hide where your COG is and which way you are moving. In Japanese Budo or Bujutsu terminology, This hiding of movement and deception of the opponent is called kyo-jitsu. Kyo means falsehood, and jitsu means truth. Needless to say, making kyo-jitsu is very important in actual fights. For example, even if you have a one-hit killing right punch, just throwing it will not hit your opponent. The opponent will avoid or block it. Therefore, you have to pretend, for example, to strike with your left and then hit your right, hit with your right. Or you can pretend to kick and then punch. Or on the other hand, if your opponent is worthy of your right hand, you can pretend to throw a right punch and then throw a left. This is common in other combat sports, but Naihanchi teaches us to make kyo-jitsu with our whole body's movement as well. In this Nami-gaeshi, you show that you are going this way, but you are actually hanging the weight on this side. It looks as if the weight is placed on the left foot, but actually it is left on the right foot using your arm's weight. So you can lift the left leg. And then you make it look like you have put the weight seriously on the right foot. But in fact, you have left it on the left foot using your arm's weight. So the right leg can be lifted. The second Nami-gaeshi is either as a movement. Just as I just said, this Nami-gaeshi is also the very movement of the classic Naihanchi principle of using the weight of the arms to control the seriousness of the whole body. Learning to make this kyo-jitsu is the second purpose of the Nami-gaeshi. This is a little off the topic of Nami-gaeshi, but to talk a little more about kyo-jitsu, there is another part of Naihanchi that teaches the movement of making kyo-jitsu with the whole body, in addition to this Nami-gaeshi. Are you aware of that? Do you know the answer? It is Naihanchi's walking itself. Naihanchi is a kata that teaches you to split your body into upper and lower sections and move them separately, right? Let's look at the Naihanchi's walking divided into upper and lower body and legs. It looks like it's moving, but it's not. It looks like it's not moving, but it is moving. It looks like it is not moving, but it's moving. And it looks like it's moving, but it's not. See, isn't that kyo-jitsu? This is a movement that cannot be done with the ordinary combat sports footwork, the bouncing movement. You cannot change the speed or direction on the way. For example, if you throw a ball at the floor, you can predict when and where it will fall at the moment it bounces. There is only jitsu in the bouncing movement. If there is only jitsu, then the only way to outperform the opponent is to increase your absolute speed. That means it is a movement that relies on your physical ability. And that means it's a difficult movement to maintain strength as you age. Returning to the Nami-gaeshi, the third purpose is to train the kicking. The movement of the pulling up the knee itself is directly connected to the training of kicking action. Now, let's compare it to Naihanchi of the other major schools. First is Shotokan's Teki. In pulling up the leg, the movement emphasis involves sweeping. Earlier, I mentioned three purposes of Nami-gaeshi. The first is to control your posture and COZ. The second is to create kyo-jitsu. And the third is to train kicks. This approach corresponds to the first and second, but not to the third. I know that the curriculum of Shotokan is different, but as I have said before, Naihanchi is originally the first kata to be learned in the Shurite or Tomarite lineage. At the same time, it is the ultimate kata, so much so that Motobu Choki says it is enough to do only Naihanchi in katas. Therefore, it's natural to think that all the essentials necessary for karate are contained in the movements of Naihanchi. If you ask what karate is, many people would answer, it is tsuki and keri. So not only tsuki, but also training for keri exists in Naihanchi. That's the obvious idea. I often see videos of Shotokan karate sensei explaining this action as ashibarai in bunkai. Ashibarai is, of course, an effective technique in actual fighting. But interpreting Naihanchi as a kata of tsuki and ashibarai is, that I feel a bit strange. Next is Naihanchi in Okinawa Shorin Ryu. Kobayashi Shorin. This is a new Naihanchi modified by Ito's uncle. The COZ is once shifted to this side, the legs are raised, and the COZ is returned while stepping hard. This way corresponds to the third, but it is a movement that does not correspond to the first and second. Also, the movement as training for that kick is a two-action movement in which the emphasis is on the leg lowering after rising. Whereas the classic Naihanchi is a one-action movement, leg rising. I feel that this part also shows the characteristic of Ito's movements, whom Matsumura Sokon disliked, saying he is slow and sluggish. Some of the old senseis have stories of how they were forced to practice Naihanchi in the rice paddies when they were younger. This must have helped them learn the movements of Naihanchi accurately and easily. If your foot is in the mat, you can learn the correct motion of pulling the leg upward without sweeping it inward. If you don't have control when you bring that leg down, the mat will splatter loudly. So you will naturally learn to bring it back gently. Meanwhile, the mat will support your balance on the standing leg. Also, you cannot do 3-ashi if your feet are in the mat. Suriashi is effective on a flat, firm floor, but not a good idea if you are thinking of fighting on the street. You will slip or trip over pebbles. Therefore, you must walk with your feet up. If you practice Naihanchi in the rice paddies, you will naturally do so. It is a well thought out practice method. That's all for this video. If you found it interesting, please like it. And I'm also looking forward to your comments. See you again. Os.